20 different keycap sets, handful of artisan keycaps, and those are the biggest scam in the whole industry. Um, but so basically, I've got a lot of this stuff. This is a world of subjectivity. Everything is subjective. What type of switches you like, what type of layouts you like, the sizes, obviously color choices, things like that. And so really the sky's the limit. You can get into a customizable keyboard fairly quickly and cheaply. Um, but it gets expensive really quickly. Um, just for an example, there is a company that sells um, small 60% keyboards that are everything except switches and keycaps. The board costs $20 for the PCB and the case. It's wireless only. It comes with a dongle or it's Bluetooth, but you can count on between 30 cents and $1.30 per switch. And then keycap sets, finding a set that actually fits that board is probably going to be $80 to $100. You can get away with a $15 set off of Amazon. It's just not going to fit great. And I've got some examples of those. And just so everybody's aware, at the end of the month on the 24th of February, I'm going to be kind of going over all this again at the 801 Labs Hackerspace. And I will have a bunch of things with me if people actually want to try out stuff like what keycaps, or not keycaps, sorry, what key switches do you actually like? And I'm going to run a little test and let people use 5 different keyboards that are reasonably identical, but with 5 different types of switches, and record what they like, and then I'll tell them what's in it. And you can go crazy there too. You
No
can build
judgment as to if you choose the wrong one.
well, I mean, I'm going to judge you if you choose the ones that I think are stupid, but again, it's all subjective. I mean, ultimately, you like what you like. And the nice thing about this is that you really can customize a board to do whatever you want, including at a firmware level. When you start getting into QMK or VIA, 2 different firmwares for a lot of the uh, open source based boards that are out there, sky's the limit. Anything that you can get an HID device to do, you can make these keyboards do.
So I've some questions about some of this. Like you were talking about price. What is I rather than talk about your collection, if you want, you can talk about yours, but you can also just stay general. But what is the cheapest custom keyboard you've ever seen or had your hands on?
Um, you
That wasn't garbage. That was like a cheap, usable, good custom keyboard.
so the Newfie board that I was talking about earlier, the entry price for that is $20. Gets you the PCB, the case, and the wireless receiver. Then it's just switches and caps. Um, if you just want to get into a mechanical keyboard, you can buy one for $30 on Amazon, and it's probably going to be okay. It's when you start getting into the custom stuff that it really ranks or starts to get expensive. Layout plays a lot into that. One of the things that I like the ortholinear layout, this grid system rather than the staggered rows or staggered columns.
How long does it take you to get used to that, going from a regular to an ortholinear?
It took me a week the first time. Now I'm kind of bilingual when it comes to keyboards. I can switch back and forth between ortho and staggered.
We
I
say a
tend
week. Was that a week of typos or a week of like screaming or a week of
to swearing a lot and having to stare at the letters and kind of touch type, or not touch type, hunt and peck to start, and then you learn. Like the overall layout is the same. It's just the row offset is different, and so it just takes a little bit of learning. And the other thing that takes a little bit of getting used to, particularly on the very small form factor boards, the 40% and smaller, is learning how layers work, where you use meta keys basically just to change layers. So
What do
yeah,
you
there's
mean
no
by
number row
layers?
on a plank, but if I touch the raise key and Q, that's one, W's two, etc. And so it takes a little bit of getting used to on the alternative layouts, but it's certainly doable. Now, I've tried and failed to learn Dvorak or Colmac, some of the
That's what I
more.
was asking is if you were doing any of the other layouts. So
No.
you've never done Colback or Dvorak or anything?
No, the QWERTY layout's a little too ingrained. You touch type for almost 40 years, and then it's not something that you really readily pick up. Um,
Can't teach an old dog new tricks.
the You can. I mean, I learned the ortho layout, and I'm sure that given time, it's just I didn't really care to. So
Yeah.
the
You
other thing
know,
that you run into running non-standard layouts is keycap compatibility. Gets really hard to find keycap sets that fit.
do they sell like Colmac or Dvorak specific
Some.
keycaps? So you
Yep.
can get them for some boards.
Yep. And
How much different is there in keycaps? Like if as you go down the just take the left QAZ, how much different shape is there as you're going down the rows of the keyboard or yeah, the rows of the keyboard.
let me
Down the
share.
columns, sorry, columns.
Let me share a screen. I can tell which one. Nah, I'd have to drop out of Discord to do it. The profiles of switches, or sorry, of keycaps, because there's a lot of different profiles of the caps themselves, will come into play for that. Um, when you look at a key, uh, just from the side, that's what I'm talking about, the profile. It's the shape of the keycap. And there are a lot of different shapes that are available. And I will post a bunch of links later um, in the text chat. I'll have examples of keycap profiles. I'll have examples of mounting systems. Um, some of the companies that I have purchased stuff from that I like. One that I've purchased a lot of stuff from that I don't like, but due to the size of the organization, it's kind of hard to avoid. And then I'll also post a link to the Mech Group Buy site. And that's another thing to consider in all of this is it's not like going to Amazon and picking parts up. You can absolutely build a keyboard, a fairly custom keyboard out of stuff that you get off of Amazon, but there's a couple of caveats to that. You're limited as to what's available. Um, there are a lot of clones, particularly in the keycap space, where somebody's come up with a colorway and a theme for keycaps, and then they've gone through a group buy process where they've sold them through one of the group buy runners out there, and you know made whatever little tiny amount of money that they make, and then a Chinese company comes along, clones it, clones the colorways, and then sells them on Amazon or eBay.
It's 80% of the functionality of the original.
I mean, it's bits of plastic. It's 100% of the functionality. It's just how much do you care if you're buying something that's not, for lack of a better term, legit. Um, it, there's a whole argument to be made about the legitimacy of nothing more than color changes in a keycap set, but I digress. Um,
So while you were talking, Bash was talking about, he says the worst choice he ever made was to go Dvorak. So there's our endorsement for Dvorak. On the other hand, I don't see it. I don't see Ask on here, but he would say that it was the best choice he ever made. And his is funny because he chose to use Dvorak just so he could log into someone else's computer because they said their security was that they used Dvorak and no one else could use their computer.
Yeah,
But
uh, it's
uh, jumping a little bit, we talked earlier about the cheapest. What is the most expensive keyboard you've been hands-on with?
um, at a keyboard meet. One guy had uh, a board that a milled aluminum case with copper weight that just the case with the weight was about $1,200 at a group buy, and then plus whatever else he had into it. It was if you were to find that particular board on the secondary market, it'd be a $3,000 or $4,000 board.
Wow. And
Um,
how much is that actually giving value for their time? Like you talk about, you know, we've talked before about some of your favorite switches. You pull every switch apart, you assemble two switches to one, you lube the bits and everything. When you give price, are you including your time in any of that price, or is that material price?
no, it's just material price. There's a really bad secondary market problem in the hobbyist keyboard world where people buy up, you know, lots of group buy stuff that may be a one-off group buy, and then sit on it for a while and then flip it. And um, it's not something I would call an investment property, but people have definitely made money doing this. One of the links that I'll drop is for the mech group buy site. And basically, this is just kind of a curated list of various group buys. And the way a group buy works is a bunch of interested people pay for a product up front that doesn't exist yet. Notionally, that goes to building the product out, and you'll see it when you see it if you see it. Some group buy runners have
Is this a pay up front like Kickstarter? Is there any sort of guarantee or benefit to you if it doesn't make the light of day, or are you just
front
gambling?
like Kickstarter, and there's absolutely no guarantee. I mean, various group runners have better or worse reputations, and
Is
that
there
kind of
comments on the group buy site to kind of say be wary of this guy or this? You
I
know, I've bought 20 from them; they all
because I
work.
don't use it. I try to avoid group buys.
Okay.
I'm tired of them.
Because of the risk, or just because?
Because of the risk, and also because it's like encouraging what I think is a bad business prospect. Like when I buy something, I want to go to a place or to a site and buy something and know that it's going to be on the way. You know,
Yeah.
maybe shipping is a if it's shipping from China, which almost all of this stuff can or originates there. And I've definitely bought things from Norwegian companies that ship directly to me from Shenzhen. Um, the I just prefer to buy in stock items whenever I can.
Yeah.
That's a personal preference, but
Makes sense.
it's it's a lot, and also to be able to build something in a week or two rather than months or even a year or more. Um,
So that's one of my other questions. You say build it in a week or two. That's time to get parts. What is your time to build? Like when you get up, once you have all the parts on the table, what's your assembly time for keyboards?
Depending on the mounting style, and one of the links that I will give shows different mounting styles, and also depending on if I have to solder the board or not. If
Do you
it's
prefer
just
soldered or just placed boards?
I'm
What
lazy, I
what
prefer hot swap. Also, that gives me the ability to change my mind easier and not have to desolder, you know, 60 or 80 switches.
they cost comparative?
Um, no, the hot swap's going to cost more than a solder
All right.
board.
Anyway,
But
what's the time for solder versus hot swap for the assembly?
I mean, unless it's a really complicated case, I can put a board together that's hot swap in under an hour. Um, if it's a soldered board, it depends. I have some that you solder all of the components onto the PCB, like the integrated circuit for the controller and the USB port and all of the diodes and the crystal and just like everything.
I think we need to sell those kits in HHV this year, SaintCon.
Sourcing the parts is a thing. I've looked into it. Um, but, you know, and also when you get into one of the most common microcontrollers for that kind of a board is a Arduino Pro Micro style. And most of them out there are really shitty. And the micro USB ports love to break off of them.
Yeah.
I've I've broken several of them. There are some USB-C variants. They cost quite a bit more. When I can get a Pro Micro for $3, an Elite C microcontroller is going to be $17. And for one board, that's not bad. But when you start, kitting out a
How
big
many
project,
how many boards are in the room you're in right now?
uh, over 40.
That's awesome. I love
I
it.
have 3 on my desk. I have 2 sitting next to me. I've got 2 shelves full. Um, I have a problem. Don't be me.
We all have problems. Yours is just different than mine. That's cool though, actually. I think it's cool. I actually stopped by yesterday and checking out the 5 keyboards you've got for that 801 Labs night. That's pretty cool to you always hear about, oh, Cherry MX will feel like this or this is what's going on, and I'm not a keyboard guy, so it was really cool for me to actually get hands on and say, okay, that's a Trash Panda, that's a Cherry MX, and see what the different switches were, what they felt like.
Yeah.
It's a
And
it's a cool plug for your event and it coming up in the end of the month, but it is nice to sit down and have quality keyboards and be able to feel the difference.
the hardest question that I get a lot for people coming into this is like, what switch should I use? And it's so subjective. Everyone has different things that they're looking for. And that's why I put those together. And those are on those cheap $20 Chinesium wireless only boards. I think half of the switches in my Cherry MX Brown one are bad. So, I mean, you can't even type with that one. The other ones you can. What I like about having the switches in a board rather than the big switch testers, and I have a couple switch testers that's just a piece of acrylic with 60 or 70 different switches on it. What I like about having them in the board is that you actually get to type on it and you got to see, all right, it feels great for my index and my uh, middle finger, but it's not so good for my ring finger and my pinky finger um, because of the spring weight. Or uh, this spring is so light that I double type a lot of things. When I intend to type one character, I type multiple. And do you like a linear switch? Do you like a tactile switch? Do you like a clicky switch? And that's why I put those together, is that it gives you a variety of different types. Everything from the cheapest that I could find, sketchy, no one's ever heard of them, site out of China, to Franken switches that cost me over $1 a piece because I've had to take 2 apart to put them together, and plus the time of breaking them open,
Yeah.
swapping parts, lubing them, stuff like that. If you use my hourly rate, I don't even want to know what any of these boards cost. Um, but it's also sometimes kind of relaxing when you're doing something else. You sit and you lube switches on your desk while you're watching a webinar or
Death by meetings. All those meetings that should have been emails, they make great keyboards.
yeah, absolutely. So
So if you were getting it, if you were talking to someone just getting into it, just starting from scratch, obviously finding a way to get hands on switches is one of the first things. What are some of the other things you would advise them to look at or to do to consider as they're jumping into building a keyboard?
consider layouts, and consider layouts that you don't think that you would like. Um,
When you say
and
layouts, you're not saying Dvorak and Colmac, or are you saying
so I'm
ortho?
talking ortholinear or staggered, or the percentages, like everyone knows what a 104 key Windows keyboard looks like, just standard full size keyboard. Maybe you want something a little more compact, but you have all of those keys. Well, there's a layout called an 1800. Maybe you don't want any of the numpad or any of those keys, and so you have the 10 keyless. Me, I like small compact boards, so I've landed in the 65% layouts for the most part, and tend to not stray too far from those for a couple of reasons. One, I like the layout. Two, I like the aesthetics because there's a lot of availability for parts for caps and whatnot. Um, and three, it's probably the most common in the hobbyist world. Um, just for typing. And Bash, you can live without a 10 key because you can also put it on a layer. And that's the great thing about all of these open source things is that you can program them however you want. But uh,
So to
for
try out, I was just gonna say to try out these different layouts. Obviously, you've got that thing coming up in a couple of weeks, but what are other resources? What are other things that you recommend? If someone's like, I want to try layouts, they're not going to spend $800 buying five different keyboards or whatever. So how do you?
have a good, I don't have a good solution for that.
Are there? You talked about some meetups and stuff? Are there? And I've heard about some discords and whatnot. Are there ways and resources like? Does it happen often, or do you kind of have to be in the group to get into these events?
I mean, obviously, it hasn't happened in the last 2 years,
Yeah,
but
COVID sucks.
there is a Utah Mechanical Keyboard Discord. Anybody that is interested in joining that, reach out to me directly. Anybody who's already a member, please don't post the invite link. I have been asked by the moderators to kind of filter the influx of people. So please just reach out to me and I'll get you an invite link. Unless you're super sketchy, and then I'll give you an invite link to some like Coin Bro stupid Discord. Um, but that's probably one of the best resources, to be honest, that I can say in a group of people that I've been involved with for several years now is it's friendly. Like there's a bunch of in jokes and there's a bunch of, um, memes and things that kind of have developed in that community as they do in any community. But overall, it's a really good community, and they did pre-pandemic have periodic meetups where you could go try out someone else's board and see what people have done and see the very artistic things that are out there.
Well, and
Right.
there's things that I haven't even seen, like Mav, probably 5 or 6 years ago at St. Con, Mav did a talk on his search for keyboards that didn't make his wrist hurt. And he had some of the craziest layouts I've ever even, like it was a stick your hand in this circle pod thing. And it was layouts I never would have imagined, but he's like, they work and they're cool.
The Maniform Dactyl is or Dactyl Maniform, one of those two is one of those like super ergonomic layouts. It's very DIY. So you've got to be comfortable not only soldering, but like hand wiring. 3D printing typically, because that's how you get the cases for them. There's uh, the Kinesis Advantage is a very similar layout. That's a commercial board, and I think it goes for about $400. A friend of mine swears by him. He's been using them for over 20 years. And the funny thing about that is he's a programmer. He types on those in Dvorak when he's working, and anything else he types in QWERTY in a standard staggered layout when he's not working. And he's just trained his mind. He gets into two different mental contexts when he does that.
Some ways it might be easier to have a different layout, like both keyboard and physical key layout, and then it makes I could see how that might make the shift easier for you.
Yeah. And I definitely use a different layout of board for work than I do for like gaming. And that is because I have different requirements with the tools that I use that I need an arrow cluster on for work.
Yeah, that's one of the
And
comments Bash made in Discord. He's like, he was talking about Dvorak to QWERTY, and he's like, it just wasn't worth it because gaming swapping between them was too hard. But he said, use the firmware in the keyboard; it's much more reliable than if you use the OS to do it. And I thought that was a pretty good tip and pretty good hint there if you're swapping between like Dvorak or Comac or anything else.
and you can have those using QMK or VIA. You can have those on different layers and switch between the layers.
When you say layers, is that just a programming layer within the firmware of the keyboard?
Yeah, so layers, there's you can use like a meta key, like a raise or a lower, and it's like another shift or a control or an alt, right? And it
All right.
just changes what the key does. But you can also completely shift layers into, so you don't have to hold a key down to do that. You can shift layers and have a completely different layout.
Hmm.
Um, so you could have Dvorak, QWERTY, Comac all on the same keyboard.
Just
At
different
the same
layers.
time. And you just switch layers to change them. In fact, I've accidentally switched into Dvorak before, and it took me a while to figure out what I did and how to get back, but not before I had already locked myself out of my password.
So what are the common like firmwares and hardware that because you're talking about layers, obviously different boards are going to have different hardware to them. So let's talk about some of the firmware and the hardware within the keyboards.
Anything commercial is probably going to be proprietary. Razer has their proprietary stuff. Logitech has their proprietary stuff.
Yeah.
In the hobbyist world, the two big ones, and they're actually related, are QMK, and I'll grab a link for QMK as well and post it later. Um, that is open source firmware. There's a GUI um, way to, if you just can't deal with command line, there's a GUI to do it. You can build it in Mac OS. You can build it in Linux. You have to run a shell environment called MSys to do it in Windows. Very powerful though, and you can build your own layouts, and you can build your own firmware pretty much from the ground up using that framework. Then there's another one called VIA, which is a fork of QMK that's a lot more accessible. That if you have the VIA firmware utility, you can go into a GUI on a computer and make all the changes you want. And so I have switched to mostly doing VIA firmwares where I can. And but a lot of stuff I have, there's no VIA firmware for it, and so it's just done in QMK. But uh, you can use the keyboard layout editor website to build a custom layout, and then with that you get a JSON file that you can then import into KB firmware to build your firmware, and you can do this all through a web browser too, and it's all based off of QMK. So if you want to
You
really
flash
wacky layout, you can do it.
Can you flash like I've heard of people using like AT time or Teensies and other things like that as controllers. QMK goes on various controllers, or do you have to have a specific controller for that? Does the controller determine which firmware you're going to use? I guess is the question.
A 32U4 microcontroller, which is what's in a Pro Micro, is probably the most common. There are others. It helps if the microcontroller has a native USB stack. Like a 32U2 doesn't, but a 32U4 does, I believe. I'm definitely going by memory here. It's been a long time since I used those other older ones.
See,
Sometimes,
I always use the smaller ones, and I know 328 doesn't. So, but that was for other projects, not even keyboards. But keep going.
yeah, yeah, the 328, the absolutely it does not, because I got some boards that had 328s and then found that out the hard way. Um, Sometimes you can break a microcontroller and you have to have like um, an AVR ISP to unbrick it.
Yeah.
At that point, I've usually decided to remove the microcontroller and change it because they're cheap, and I'm lazy.
So about the only thing we haven't talked about is and I guess we touched on a little bit, is switches.
Yep.
Um, and I'm totally, you've talked about how there's like linear and there's clicky and there's just the tactile feedback. Um, but like, what are some of and I know that they differentiate, like there's the pinks and the blues and the purples and everything like that. Every company kind of has their own color with that. Is that right? Like their
Yeah,
red isn't red everywhere. It's a little different, depends on who
for
makes
the
it.
most part, red, blue, and brown are linear, clicky, and tactile, respectively. That's fairly common. Once you're past that, all bets are off. Uh, the switch types, a linear switch has no tactile feedback whatsoever. It's just a straight linear spring rate. Um, I personally don't like them. A lot of people love them. If you don't bottom out the keystroke when you type, um, it can be very pleasing, I guess, to type on those. I personally want the tactile feedback of a bump, not a click, but just something that I can feel when I press the key. The clicky is purely for noise. It often comes with some tactility, but not always. And there are various ways that the click is achieved. There's a click jacket on a cherry stem. Uh, there are click bars in the Kale um, heavy clicks. There are um, in the old IBM buckling spring, the click that you got in that was the actual spring buckling and hitting the side of the little tunnel thing that it's in, and that's how it makes the electrical connection. But it had the side effect of being clicky. Alps switches had a click spring, so there's a lot of different ways to achieve the same thing. For me, I care more about how something feels than it sounds, with the exception of I don't like the tinny ringing sound that you get from springs a lot of times. So that is the number one reason why I would lube a switch, is to get rid of that.
Well, on Discord, they've kind of gone into a show my stuff, and so I want to give you a quick time to show some of your stuff, and then if anyone else on there wants to jump on and show their stuff afterwards, that'd be cool too. But if you've got a couple of boards that you want to show, or a couple you
I mean,
uh, have thoughts on or anything.
right next to me, this I call the Lisa Plank. The layout is ortholinear 40%. Um, OLKB is who originated the Plank idea, and then they partnered with Drop. Used to be called Mass Drop, now it's just Drop, as a group buy site. And so I got this through the group buy on Drop. This is the first themed board that I did. So it's this pink case, and then I found these vintage Lisa Frank stickers from the 90s. These are definitely like 1993, 1994 vintage.
Makes me feel
They're
old that you say 90s is vintage, Marv.
Yeah, I'm older than you are, I think. The the problem with this is that I don't like the switches that I put in this anymore, so I don't really type on it. Um, it's
So
one
what
of my most
switches did that one have?
Kale chalk heavies or jade heavies. So it's a heavy clicky switch from Kale or Kaiwa. And then this guy um, is one that I called Purple Drink. And this is Alf DZ60 case. It's milled aluminum, very sharp. You could use this definitely as a weapon. Brass plate, Holy Panda switches that I built, Chocolate Factory keycaps, nice and thocky. Uh, the keyboard that I used today is the Novel Keys NK 65 entry, which is one of their entry level boards. I think the kit, which comes with the case, PCB plate, and a cable, is about $95 for the entry. And then it's switches and keycaps. And the caps that I have on here are Neon Genesis Evangelion themed. They're called Mecha 01. So they have katakana as well as English characters on them. Not that I speak Japanese or know how to write anything in those characters. And then the cables that I have that I'm using, which are coiled cables with kind of a flexi coating. Those were made by a local guy. I'll drop a link to his shop. He is kind of overwhelmed with orders, so but I'm actually testing some of these keyboard or some of these cables for him. But he made them specifically for me.
Cool.
The the other board that I use a lot is a Real Force 87U, which uses Toper switches, which are technically not mechanical switches. They're electrocapacitive, like a rubber dome membrane board, but they use a mechanical slider, and it probably feels the best out of any of the boards that I own. I just don't like the layout that much because it's 10 keyless and it's big, but it's a go-to board for me as well.
So the other question that was just posted is, for someone who doesn't want to do the home build or the hobby, go the hobby route, what is the most solid, like which of the keyboard manufacturers are most solid and most reputable to go with? Obviously, you still have the same switch debate and everything else with them, but
I
which
like
of the off the
GMMK.
shelves? You
I
like which
have
one?
a GMMK Pro. It's a glorious gaming master race or something like that. I don't like the company name, but they actually make a pretty solid board. Keychron makes a pretty good board. Almost everybody that I know that has a Keychron really loves them. And Keychron, with their Q2 board that they just released, it's a more premium style board with a heavy aluminum chassis and their various switch options. It's a very good looking board, and so I want to say it's a couple $100, but it gets you further along the path into that more premium custom feel. And let's talk about Drop for a second. Drop is a group buy. It's kind of started as a group buy site, but now they have in stock items. Um, Sometimes they're the only option to find certain things. I dislike them as a company quite a bit, and I have had a very rough time with some of the stuff that I've ordered just not showing up. And then, it took over a month to make it from North Salt Lake to here, thanks to FedEx. But every time that I was, contacting Drop, they were just kind of gaslighting me and saying, "Oh no, it's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing." Talk to us in a week if it's not back. Oh, talk to us in a week if it's not back. We saw that it changed state and stuff like that. Their customer service is awful. The quality control on their boards is hit or miss. I have 4 Drop keyboards. One of them I don't trust at all because the sockets will pop out, and I just don't feel like going in and reworking and resoldering all the hot swap sockets. Others work just fine, but they have their Icon series or Signature series boards, which are, again, kind of that more entry into the premium keyboard world without spending, $500. You can get into it for a couple, $200 or $300. It's not cheap. Like, let's be very upfront there. Even in a $20 board, I can expect to spend at least $30 for switches and caps. More like $45 to $50, and those are the cheapest stuff that I can get off of Amazon for the caps, and then just cheap switches that I had on hand.
Makes sense.
And the test boards I have are those. Uh, just because I also don't care. Like, I can stomach if someone destroys a $20 board a lot more than a $500 board.
Yeah. Hey, we're running up on. I tell everyone that we'll keep these short so they can still get some lunch afterwards. We're running up on time. But anything else you want to talk about or say, or any other thoughts before we? I still want to give everyone a chance to show theirs really quick. But any other thoughts from you first?
No, happy to. I'll be hanging around, sitting at my desk for the rest of the day. So if you have any questions, happy to talk. I'll dump a bunch of links in the chat here with options and stuff. I'll give a shout out to Keyhive. He's a local guy uh, that I've done a lot of business with, that I have a lot of trust in. It's keyhive.xyz. Um, he constantly is getting stuff in stock, and he rolls through quick. It's a side job for him, so it's not like his only thing. But he's ordering uh, boards, having them fabbed in China, shipped over, and has a lot of DIY kits. And it's a very reasonable way to get in uh, through some of his. And he'll have a lot of kind of more of the enthusiast, weird layout stuff. But definitely, I'll pimp him anytime. But I'll drop all of the links that I'm dropping that are storefronts are ones that I have done business with, and all but one of them are ones that I like doing business with. One of them I dislike intensely, and that's Drop. But sometimes they're the only game in town if they're the group buy runner for the caps that you just have to have or whatnot.
Yeah.
But happy to share all that stuff. And
Yeah. Cool.
a deep,
We'll
deep rabbit hole.
we'll look forward to those in seeing those in Discord for sure. As we wrap up, I know that Clipper and Bash both had some pics they were sharing. Do you guys want to take a second and show off your keyboards really quick too? They're both muted. All right, I think they're good. So rather than spend more time and take some more time on here, if you do have questions, there were some pics posted in Discord. You can just check them out there. I'm going to go ahead. Thanks, Marv, for spending your time talking to us. It's tons
No
of
worries.
fun. Like I said, it's one of those things I've always been on the outside of and thought I should look at that. I should dig into that. I never have. But again, a plug for that 801 Labs event. Was it 24th, you said?
24th from 7 to 10.
24th, 7 to 10, 801 Labs. Go there and check it out. Get some hands on some keyboards. There'll be some boards there. There'll be some good people there. There'll be a ton of knowledge there. So for sure, check that out. If you've never been, it's a good excuse to go there and meet them up. Anyway, thanks again, Marv. It's been fun to talk to you, and we're going to start trying this year. My goal is to try to stay more on top of these show and tells and have them every month for you. So we've recorded this one, and it should be on YouTube a little later. And if you have topics you want to do, or you have people you want to have talk to us, let me know. These are just supposed to be 30 to 45-minute informal talks and whatever topics you want. So,
All
all
right.
right, thanks everybody. We'll see you.